Madam President, today we're going to be voting on the first of what will be many resolutions of disapproval under the Congressional Review Act. To roll back the avalanche of federal regulations that the Obama administration placed on the U.S. economy and, most importantly, Madam President, the working men and women of this great country. Now, nowhere have these regulations been more of a burden than on the energy industry of America, which employs millions of Americans, Democrats, Republicans, good, hard-working Americans, and thousands of hard-working Alaskans, my constituents. So I am particularly pleased, Madam President, that the first of these actions, and we're going to be using the Congressional Review Act a lot, because the economy and families in America need relief. But I'm particularly pleased that the first of these actions in the Senate is to nullify the Department of Interior's so-called stream buffer rule. Now, my colleague and friend, senior senator from Alaska, Senator Murkowski, was down on the floor a little bit ago, and she described just how sweeping this rule was in scope, and how, despite the federal law called SMACRA, which requires cooperative federalism, working closely with the states, the Obama administration didn't give the states any input. Certainly not my state. But what I wanted to talk about, Madam President, on this rule in particular, why it's so important to have not just Republicans but Democrats, and I am going to encourage my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to please support this resolution of disapproval. Why it's so important we vote for this resolution of disapproval today is because of the coal miners in America. The coal miners in America who have been under incredible strain, and their families. And the vote we take today is going to offer them the first signs of relief in years. Now, there were projections by the Department of Interior's own contractors, as my colleague Senator Murkowski mentioned a little bit ago, that thousands of coal miners would lose their jobs because of this rule. Thousands. A study showed that estimates would be 1/3 of coal mining jobs in the country were at risk because of this rule. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. 1/3. Studies showing that by the Department of Interior's own contractors. But not to worry, the Obama administration issued the rule anyways. And again, as my colleague Senator Murkowski mentioned, there were concerns, very legitimate concerns in my state, that this rule could literally kill every coal mining job in Alaska at the Usabelli coal mine in interior Alaska. So what was the so-called stream buffer rule really about? What was it? Well, I think we all know. It was the last salvo in the Obama administration's arsenal in the war on coal miners. A war that has left thousands of hardworking Americans out of work, injured, in despair, in its wake. That's what happened. Just look at what happened. Look at our own federal government going to war against hardworking Americans. And that's what happened for 8 years. Disgraceful in my view. Well, now it's time to fight back. Now it's time to fight back. Now it's time for this body to show coal miners in America that we're actually on their side and not against them, and not trying to ruin them and their families. So, Madam President, I want to recount a recent colloquy of a bunch of my colleagues from the other side of the aisle from last December, right before recess. Many of my colleagues, all of whom I respect highly, on the other side of the aisle, my Democratic colleagues came down on the floor, and they were saying how coal miners of America were under siege, how they needed help. They were talking about my good friend and colleague, Senator Manchin's bill with regard to protecting coal miner pensions, which, by the way, I'm a co-sponsor of. So I agree about protecting our coal miners. But I watched a lot of those remarks. My colleagues were down on the floor for several hours. But what I found very ironic was that I looked at a lot of these senators and said, where were you during this 8-year war against coal miners? What were you doing? I hate to say it, but a lot of them were allies in the Obama administration's assault on hard-working families and coal miners. I'm not saying that about my good friend from West Virginia, Joe Manchin, but there was a lot who were. Heck, some were even leading the charge. But nevertheless, several were down here on the floor right before the holidays, lamenting what's happened to the coal miners in America. So to my colleagues who are down here shedding tears for America's coal miners in December, I want to offer a challenge to you. Here's your chance. Here's your chance. This is a rule that our own federal government has said will put thousands of coal miners out of work. If you really care about the coal miners of America, whether in West Virginia or Alaska, come down on the Senate floor this afternoon when we have this vote and vote for this resolution of disapproval. If you want to help the coal miners, if you want to turn this around so there's no war against them, led by the federal government, in its own studies it says, yep, sorry, you and your family are going to be out of work. If you really care, like you were saying in December, then come down to the floor today and vote for this resolution. Madam President, I yield the floor.